Okay. So that's everything there. Baking options. This is where we're going to go to next. Here it's remembered the last place and the last name that I sent a file. I'm going to click on the little dots, and I need to tell this where to go. So I'm going to pick my file, and usually, again, I just make an asset folder specifically for this. I'm just going to put these right here for in between, and I'm just going to call this lid. It's going to say OK. This is where I pick my map size. Again, if you had an aspect of 2:1, so a longer UV space before you shrunk it down 50% horizontally, you would choose a 2K by 1K map or a 1K by 512 map. You would keep that aspect ratio. I UV'd everything in 1:1, 0:1 space, a 1:1 aspect ratio, so I'm baking out a 1K by 1K map. So I choose my map size there. Obviously, the larger the map size, the longer it's going to take to bake. It's always safer to bake a larger map and then de-res later, like in Photoshop. You can always de-res a map. It's very difficult to take a 512 map or 256 map and then say all of a sudden you want to have a 2K texture out of it, right? You literally have to make the whole thing again from scratch. So, has anyone here played an HD remake of some of their favorite games? Some look a lot better than others, right?
Halo Anniversary.
You know, if you look, like you look at Halo Anniversary, right? The textures look a heck of a lot different. Other HD remakes, it might just look like the textures are a little bit more crisp, but there's really not any more information there. They're just higher res textures of the same that have probably been sharpened up a little bit. But you look at Halo, they're completely different textures have been remade. Or you look at Wind Waker that's coming out that's in 1080p. It looks a lot different than when it did when it first came out. But usually you bake out maps that are probably at least one size larger than what you'd want, and then you scale them down later. And that way, maybe you're going to use the higher res map for cinematic, or especially now, when these new consoles come out where textures can probably easily be twice the size. Hey, I have a texture version for 360 and PS3 and Wii U, and now I have a set of textures that are even higher resolution for Xbox One, PS4, and maybe even higher textures for PC. PC textures are still going to have, higher and be able to potentially handle higher resolution textures even than when the new stuff comes out, depending on what type of rig you've got. So this is where you can set that. I always save a little bit larger and then go down. Edge padding. This is where the bleeding is, right? So the amount of space that you gave yourself in UV space, the padding. If you set an edge padding of like 20, chances are, if you didn't give enough space in between your UV islands, it's going to bleed over and occupy some other part of your texture space. So anywhere between about 4 to 6 is a pretty good edge padding, especially for the size of the map. Bucket size is the amount of samples that you're taking. Larger sample size equals a more accurate bake, especially in the ambient occlusion. Less will take a lot less time. I just put it at 128. You can go up to 512. Again, that's probably where Topo Gun is a little bit more powerful. I think in Topo Gun you can do a bucket size of 2K, and you'll sit there for probably hours. Okay. Map size you can go up to 8K by 8K. I think that's probably about the same. I don't know if Topo Gun does 16K maps. I think it maxes out at 8K too. Rendering option. Here you have some other ones. OpenRL is probably the fastest. I remember if your graphics card supports that. I'm just going to do default. And anti-alias, or AA, I'm going to pump up to 4K. Yours is probably at 1K by default. I don't know why it's default 1K. It's just going to look really ugly and pixelated. Pump it up to 4K. So if you're getting a really bad bake, it just looks really jagged, check what you set your AA at. Rendered maps. We're going to do a normal map and an AO map. Okay. Once we have our Photoshop license is activated, I will also render out convexity maps, which you use with your AO map. And a convexity map just allows you to add a little bit darker detail within the crevices. Okay, it's just something very slight, but just makes it pop even more. Okay, so we have all that. That's everything in this interface. The fine detail, we're not going to do anything here. And then we're going to go to tools. This is tools that transfer information in between maps. So you can take a photo and then, or any type of grayscale. Say you painted something in Photoshop and you wanted to create a normal map out of it. You can do it right here. You can transfer in between object and tangent, normal space, etc. You can create a simple occlusion from a normal map and other things like that. But what we want to do is a ray distance calculator. Okay? What this is doing, by default, what a projection bake does instead of a cage, it's kind of like when we did our auto map in Maya. Remember when you did the auto map in Maya, you had 6 projection planes around your object, and it's just projecting information from 6 different axes, positive and, well, 3 axes, positive and negative, and it's transferring that information. By default, that's how this would project. But we want to get a little bit more accurate than that. So I'm going to run this tool called the ray distance calculator. And what it's going to do, it's going to take the high and low poly model, and it's going to bounce a bunch of different points in between the two and try to determine how close that each point of the model is of the low to the high. Essentially, it's going to create its own cage or projection information by running this calculation. The longer you let it run, the more accurate it becomes. So all you do is click on this and hit go. And let this run for at least 60 seconds. You can let this run indefinitely and it will keep going. If for some reason it gives you a warning and it won't let you run, the reason why it won't is you have an end gun. It will not function with an end gun. It'll tell you to go fix the end gun.
Tells me to fix the end gun.
Well,
Huh?
That happens to me.
Yeah, then you need to fix it. So if that's the case, if you have an end gun, what you need to do is you just stop it. You need to go back into Maya, find the end gun, fix the end gun,
No,
and re-export it. Now, if you triangulated your model, it should be impossible for it to have an end gun, right? Because if it's an end gun, it's going to triangulate it into triangles anyways. Okay? So I'm going to let this run for about a couple minutes, and then we'll go to the next step.
It's just a distance. It's still matrix either way. So I need to find out what else I need. I mean, this isn't mine.